What is up, everybody? I am Danny Rodriguez, owner and operator of DKR Strength Systems. Today, we're going to talk about the 8-meter shot in lacrosse. I just find this to be such a unique scenario. If you think about what's going on, you have a ton of actions from both the shooters and the defenders and other outside variables. They all come together and alter the scenario as a whole to create a result, all within the span of 2 to 3 seconds. A lot of stuff is jammed up into this 2 or 3 seconds. So the biggest constraint we have in this scenario is time. The minimum amount of time to get our bodies to an acceptable speed, the amount of time it takes for the defenders to close in and crash, the amount of time it takes for us to travel the actual distance to be in a position to shoot, and the amount of time it takes for us to assess our position and shot placement. Remember, we have less than 9 yards to get this done. And in all actuality, they're traveling at or a little bit more than 5 yards in total. That is not a lot of space, that's not a lot of time. Mechanically speaking, this is a scenario where the athlete has to accelerate immediately into a decelerative posture. They have to get enough initial separation from them and the incoming defenders to get their trunks and hips in a position to get off a shot. Now, I say decelerative because of the reversal of postures the athlete has to assume. They're clearly accelerating as the whistle blows, but the further out they get from that initial start and the closer they get to the cage, they begin to decelerate because of the growing verticality of their trunk. This allows more room for the athlete's feet to get ahead of them and act as braking forces. Now, like I mentioned before, this is a highly non-linear scenario. There is a ton of chaos and volatility that is jammed within this 2 to 3 seconds. With that being understood, we can't control the other defenders, the refs, the weather, but we can streamline our efforts and process to make the uncontrollables have less impact on the scoring opportunity. Now, we're going to start by highlighting one of the biggest issues I see with athletes taking the shot. The kind of front leg, but not really set up. With how this is cued and how it's set up, for a good amount of athletes, the sequence of events just takes too long. And it comes with other issues as well, which we'll get to. But here's what I mean. The athlete begins in a split stance position with their weight loaded on their front foot. The movement begins with an initial unweighting of the front leg to give the back leg a deeper shin angle and more leverage to push and project the athlete's center of mass. This will look like an initial semi-push off of the back leg. The impulse from the back leg puts the load back onto the front leg. The next will be another semi-push off of the now loaded front leg, but now this has more leverage to work. Possible drawbacks of this start. 1. Multiple steps can take more time and limit initial horizontal projection or explosion. 2. There's a higher likelihood of underutilizing force production qualities, which is essential in acceleration. I'm going to start by saying this. This start can and does work for a lot of players. If you're crushing these scoring opportunities and beating your defenders to the shot, great, awesome, thrilled for you. But an indicator that this setup isn't working is when the athlete lags or remains close to or at their initial starting spot for an unwanted amount of time after the whistle blows. Look, how this position is set up is it biases the center of gravity very far forward. This will narrow the pool of athletes who can use this setup effectively. This whole video is about identifying when the traditional cues for the setup of the 8-meter shot are failing and possible fixes for them. Now let's go over some indicators as to when this isn't working for the athlete. One of the big overarching issues with this setup is their force production or elastic qualities may not be enough to get them out of that start effectively. They may not be able to produce enough force or enough bounce to get out of such a low and coiled position with speed. So they'll end up doing one of 3 things. They will get into a starting position that feels more comfortable to them and can load. This is usually accomplished with a higher or taller setup through the ankles, knees, and hips, and a lower trunk angle in an attempt to accomplish some kind of coiling or loading response. This starting position with the ankles, knees, and hips limits how much force they can generate, and then they begin to try to overutilize elastic or bouncy qualities. The first thing that's going to happen is they're going to have to get their trunk out of the way of their legs. This increases their lag and their vertical trajectory. So think we're going up, not out, and this is stealing the gas we need out of our horizontal projection. 2, kind of similar, they are able to get into that starting position, but are not strong enough to unload that position horizontally. So they'll do it vertically. So again, we're going up, not out. Now we've highlighted 2 scenarios in which the athlete becomes vertical. I understand that they're going to have to become more vertical in the coming milliseconds to be able to get in a position to shoot, but they're hitting that vertical posture too soon, resulting in lag. This affords the defenders more time to crash, and the goalie has more time to assess where the shot is coming from and where it could go. 3, the last scenario is for the athlete who's more force-based. They strong, very reliant on force production and strength to locomote. Cool, but force production takes time. Time they don't have to spare. They may resort to similar setups in the first and second example, but with a different set of movement limitations. This specific case of athlete, compounded with the time constraints of the situation, forces that athlete to try to use movement qualities they don't possess, such as elastic or bouncy qualities. This is going to result in a substantial amount of lag, and the athlete is going to look like they're running through mud. For all three of these scenarios, their manifestation can be exaggerated by other qualities that the athlete possesses. General strength and mobility. How much sympathetic tone does this athlete have to carry around all day? And of course, their anthropometrics, how tall they are, the limb lengths, etc. If the limiting factors are in fact in the initial setup, you have a few options. 1, change the setup or starting strategy. 2, improve their movement qualities with supplementary exercises. 3, keep coaching and cueing them into that position. Let's talk about how to change that setup or starting strategy. We're going to go with 3 points here. First, have the athlete lower themselves down to a position where they feel a 5 out of 10 in terms of tension on their loaded muscles and joint structures. Less may not be enough feedback to the system to create a strong loading response. More, they run the risk of not being able to get out of that range of motion fast enough. 2, if a 70-30, 90-10 split between the weight on their feet is too biased for them, maybe a 50-50 split between their feet might unweight some of the joint structures and give everything in the hips an even shot at working together with less interference. Too much weight forward might make it difficult to unplant that foot and then replant it to your preference. This also can affect your trunk position and lower it once that foot makes contact behind you. The same problem exists, just in reverse if you have too much weight on the back leg. 3, start in a coiled position to the comfort of the athlete. Ankles, knees, hips bend to similar amounts, and knees should have less space between them than they don't. We want enough coil to load the effort, but not so much that we can't get out of it with speed. Let's switch sports now. Let's talk a block start in track and field. When those sprinters are positioned on their blocks, they are coiled up tighter than a spring. This gives them a ton of energy potential to leave those blocks. We need the same thing in lacrosse with these initial setups. To do this, we need a system that is coiled or loaded, but not to excess. And then we can unload, uncoil, and release that energy as readily as possible. Another error you'll find in the setups with these athletes is being too extended on one hip or another in the setup. How well they come out of that setup is now limited because they've already uncoiled through one hip or another, whichever one was already extended. They can't uncoil or unload that effort because it wasn't coiled or loaded in the first place. Now, collectively, you got to think the reason they aren't getting into these positions isn't because they're not listening or they're uncoachable. There's something about that position their brains don't like or they aren't predicting success with. Now we can move on to starting strategies. I can see 3 dominant strategies. First, the kind of front leg but not reeling or falling start. We've already covered the strategy, but I put it first to make a point. This is a strategy that can and does work for athletes and players. Here's my thing. I guarantee you, if we were to take a generally high-level lacrosse player who is effective and proficient at the starting strategy, and we tried to dismantle and give them another starting strategy to work with, we would either slow them down or give them little to no improvement towards their game, or at least not enough that would warrant that kind of time and attention. If you're good at the start, use it. Just remember the possible drawbacks at the start. The plow step. This is my default. The lead leg foot aggressively switches to the approximate position of the back leg foot, grabbing a deeper shin angle, while at the same time, the back leg knee snaps up. The result is a strong back leg drive with the assisting or unweighting effect from the now front side leg knee, creating horizontal force production. This is not a step backwards, as a center of mass does not retreat. This is a rapid realignment of the feet and overcoming force of the former lead leg hip. This is just what I feel comfy with. This is by no means the gold standard because there is no gold standard. Back leg start. Let's modify the kind of front leg but not really start. I would suggest lean into it and use it as a back leg start. You're using it anyway. Just turn up the impulse coming off the back leg, unground the front foot to project and create even more initial horizontal projection and increase your separation from your defenders. Look, none of these strategies are on a no-fly list and there is no gold standard. If it works for the athlete and they're scoring goals, cool, love it. It's when we're beginning to see these scoring opportunities fail is when it's smart to reassess what's going on and peek at some changes. Moving on, improving movement qualities with supplementary exercises. This sounds groundbreaking, but it's not. Just give them a well-rounded strength training program. Generally speaking, the less sexier, the better. If you're having to overly coach or overly cue an exercise, or if it looks like it belongs in a circus, it's probably the wrong exercise. Make sure that they're doing pushes, pulls, squats, hinges, lunges, single leg stuff, single arm stuff, etc. Make sure that the weight is challenging but not enough to alter the execution of it that you want. Make sure you chase full ranges of motion and articulation of joint structures. Make sure that there's a speed training element in there as well. This should be aimed at improving general movement qualities such as force production and elasticity in an athletic setting, not necessarily weight room. You should also put them in scenarios that are similar but not exactly lacrosse specific. Make them throw med balls, make them jump, make them sprint, make them run, make them cut as a general athlete, not necessarily a lacrosse player. Again, less sexier the better. No circus acts. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see with the execution of this aspect is coaches facilitating athletes performing reckless training. Now, I know when I say that, a lot of you are probably thinking, oh, someone got hurt doing something stupid in the weight room. I would argue that is the most extreme and unfortunate manifestation of reckless training. The far more common version is that nothing got done. There's a certain amount of stimulus that is needed for athletes to facilitate a training adaptation. Let's say I need to get stronger in my hips and legs to get out of this setup, and I need this much stimulus to get there. But in the coach creating and the athlete executing the program, there wasn't attention paid to all the details and factors that contribute to the stimulus as a whole, or the factors that take away and distract from that stimulus. So in total, I got here. I needed this, but I got this. Now, spread this out for all the other goals that we have for this athlete, and over the course of weeks, months, years, the possible development for this athlete is now stunted. So, are we paying attention to what we see the athlete is loading and what the athlete feels is loading? Does this plyometric movement look plyometric? Big one. Does the athlete's movement intent or focus match the coach's intent for that exercise? Does the exercise selection generally make sense for what we're trying to change in the field? Or is there a lot of filler that's sprinkled into the training plan? These questions can help us ascertain whether or not a program is going to be effective for this lacrosse player or not, or really any player, or really any athlete in any sport. Last point, you can keep coaching them and cueing them into that position. Now, I don't mean this sarcastically. It is entirely possible by consistently cueing them into that position, they might adapt and incrementally get stronger just by the constant exposure of that cue or position. You and I have both seen this at work in both athletics and as well as human development. This is literally how children grow. They're consistently being presented with obstacles and stuff to get around in their day-to-day environment they have to overcome, expressing that they're hungry, moving to the other side of the room, going up the stairs, climbing trees. This parallel is no different. Now, the concerns that I have with this approach, the likelihood of an adaptation occurring increases, and that change could possibly occur faster when there are multiple things in place suggesting for that adaptation to occur. So if we go with the approaches that I suggested before, like the athlete training program, the general cues that the coaches are giving them to get in that starting position, and with the speed training, putting them in athletic positions that are relevant, but they generally don't get into. So instead of 3 suggestions, with this approach, they're just getting 1. If the brain does not see it as significant enough, the change may not occur at all, or the change may be very, very minimal. Well, I hope this video gave you some stuff to think about when working with your lacrosse athletes in an 8-meter shot. Stay tuned. I'm going to be making more videos like this, so like and subscribe.